Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Fritz Mayer, Dean of the Korbel School of International Studies, and it's really my honor to introduce today's program and to welcome you all to the program on Forging Feminist Futures. It's no surprise to any of you, I think you all know, this time of COVID has been a particularly challenging time for exacerbating inequalities worldwide, and really in many places backtracking on hard-earned progress. We've seen COVID used to justify crackdowns on social movements and activists. It's closed civic space, clamped down on civil rights, increasing violence against women in particular. Social justice is one of the key themes of the Korbel School. We have a long history of working on issues of social justice, and we're particularly proud to be the home of IGLI, the Inclusive Global Leadership Initiative, which has been led for many years by Professor Marie Berry, from whom you'll hear later in the program. It's just an amazing resource, connecting women identified activists working at the grassroots with each other and with the Korbel community. Our speakers today are three remarkable women, Farida Nabourema, Veronica Kristanch, and Karen Isaacs, all alumni of the IGLI program. Each of them has continued the fight against repression and injustice in their countries, despite the increased challenges of the moment. They're really quite remarkable people. And we're also lucky to have Farida as the IGLI Practitioner-in-Residence this year. It's a little strange year to be in residence, but we are delighted to have you, Farida, with us. We're really excited to hear today from these activists who are fighting authoritarianism and violence, and to hear how they overcome and creatively those incredible challenges they face to build and maintain community and movements for justice. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Chen Reis, who is the director of our humanitarian assistance program at the Korbel School, and who will be the interim director of IGLI next year when Professor Berry is on a well-deserved and hard-earned sabbatical year. So very delighted to hand the program over to Chen.
Thank you so much, Dean Mayer. And thank you to everyone who's joining us and everyone who's supported IGLI over the years. We have, as you have heard, three really amazing and incredible activists with us. I'll introduce each of them briefly, though obviously this doesn't do justice to the full nature of their work and activism. The full bios are in the event description that you all will have seen when you registered. Farida Nabourema is a social activist, a writer and researcher from Togo. She's the founder of the Fara Must Go movement and a 2021 IGLI Practitioner-in-Residence at Korbel, and that's supported by the Jewish Women's Fund of the Rose Community Foundation. Veronica Kristanch is a Black queer woman from Quibdó, Colombia. She founded Posasuto, a space dedicated to Black queer people in Colombia, and she also belongs to the collective Matamba Afro-Diasporic Action, which is a group of Black women who work around Afro-diasporic feminism. Karen Isaacs is a Canadian Israeli educator living and working in Jerusalem. Her organizing work centers on bringing people together from diverse communities to learn and stand in solidarity together in creative, nonviolent, direct action. I will direct the questions to all of our panelists and give them each a chance to answer briefly. So to begin with, just to get some context, if I will ask each of you to briefly tell us all what's happening in your country right now, and what are some of the biggest challenges that you've been facing in recent times, in the past year, let's say. Veronica, we will start with you. Can you tell us a bit about what is happening in Colombia and the challenges you face?
Okay, hi everybody. Okay, right now we are facing a national strike in Colombia because Colombian people are tired of corruption of this particular government which propose some tax reforms that will increase the levels of impoverishment and inequity. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, the government's response has been a cruel and inhuman treatment to the people, reflected on more than 45 murders, around 25 victims of sexual violence, and almost 4,000 victims of police and army brutality. Especially in Cali, where I live, which is the second largest concentration of Black people in Latin America. So with all of this, plus the structural racism, misogyny, transphobic, and social inequity, the challenge is to keep alive, to work on mental and spiritual health, to find ways in which we can contribute to social transformations while working on dignifying our lives by existing despite fear. So that's like the general context. There are many manifestations, many social manifestations every day, not only in Cali, but in many cities of Colombia. And always the response of the government is repression, brutality. There are many disappears, many injured and murders every day. And there are no signs of a change, of a real change, where we have real guarantees of a real change, a real structural change that is what we need. So that is what we are facing right now.
Thank you for that context, Veronica. Farida, can you please share the context of your country?
Thank you very much, Ken, and thank you, Veronica, as well. The situation in Togo is very similar to that of Colombia, except that we don't have any ongoing mass protests like is happening in Colombia. In Togo, the country has been ruled by the same family for the past 54 years, making us the oldest military regime in Africa. And in that context, you can have an idea that we have no freedom, basically. The government is in control, but since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, they have literally used the pandemic to justify the constant crackdown on civil rights and liberties. In Togo today, the most pressing issue is that of freedom of speech and the press. In the past months, the government has shut down several media houses, has arrested multiple journalists. Some of them are currently in exile and some others are in jail. They have also banned press conferences, trying to limit the press as much as possible. And they are arresting multiple citizens for even making comments they deem unfit on social media. In 2019, December precisely, the government of Togo voted a law on cyber criminality, and funny enough, the law doesn't go after online scammers, but it goes after cyber activists who criticize the regime online. So in the current state of the coronavirus pandemic, because they have banned all forms of gathering, even though citizens are freely organizing social events such as weddings and birthdays and funerals, they are not allowed to organize anything political. But then at the same time, the government is actually deploying a lot of resources to track citizens' activities on social media, and this has led to the arrest of multiple citizens throughout the course of this year. And we have over 100 political prisoners in Togo as of today, for a small country, relatively small, of barely 8 million people. So the situation in Togo is critical in terms of the fact that we have lost all the small gains of freedom we acquired throughout several decades of struggle. The regime is much more reinforced. They have managed to consolidate power, and they are cracking down on citizens.
Thank you, Farida. It does sound like there's some commonalities there. Karen, can you say a little bit about what's going on where you work?
So right now, I mean, probably the thing that most people know about in the world is what was just happening in Gaza. But beyond that, and maybe about Sheikh Jarrah, beyond that, what's going on here is a pretty unprecedented uprising of Palestinians that's more united than it has been in many decades, which is very inspiring. I'm, as an Israeli, working in solidarity with Palestinians, and I have to say, since I've been involved in this work, this is a moment that is different than anything that's been happening before. At the same time, there's a lot of change in terms of extremist settlers, both in the West Bank and in Israel, taking sort of street violence and those kind of attacks to a new level, and being really helped by, not stopped in any way, if anything, encouraged by the police and the military and the government. And the way that the media is covering this is in such a way that I think most Jewish Israeli citizens just have no clue what's actually going on. And I'll say that I've noticed as an activist in one of the places I work the most is the South Hebron Hills. It's the southernmost part of the West Bank, Area C, which means it's under full control of the Israeli military. The violence of settlers there towards the communities that I'm working with and spending time with is like completely out of control, setting farmers' fields on fire, burning people's homes, harassing shepherds, and what is more unusual in this moment is that even when there are Jewish Israeli activists there, the police and the military are responding like, you know, just letting the settlers do whatever they want without any kind of intervention. So it feels like we're in a moment of, in a way, a bit of a chaos in terms of the violence that's happening in the interpersonal level, which is in addition, obviously, to the like structural violence that has been going on for decades.
Thank you for that, Karen. So now I'm really interested in having you talk a little bit about what role creativity plays in your activism. How has it contributed to your work, specifically in the current moment with some of the additional challenges arising from COVID-19 and the current context where you work? Farida, would you like to take that one first?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of the question?
Yeah, so how has the creativity contributed to your work currently with COVID-19 and other aspects of the current context in your country?
Thank you for the question, Ken. Initially, in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of confusion in terms of what we should do and how we should respond. But then eventually we came up to kind of like try to analyze the best way for us to continue organizing amidst this time. In a country like Togo, where the government is extremely repressive and doesn't hesitate to use excessive force against citizens when they protest or when they organize physically, the digital space have given us some form of shield over the years to reduce violence towards dissidents. However, since 2017, the government of Togo purchased a spyware called Pegasus from an Israeli firm called NSO, which they have used to infiltrate social media platforms and the devices of dissidents. And this has led to the arrest, torture of multiple Togolese activists, journalists, and different people in the political sphere. So we have come to the realization that the government is cracking us down both online and offline. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, our ability to meet physically was even more impossible because for safety reasons, even for the dissidents themselves and for the sake of preventing the spread of the virus, it wasn't possible for people to organize even small-scale meetings in the comfort of their homes. So we thought about the best way for us to respond to this was to create a messaging platform that we could use offline without using the internet, that is encrypted from end to end, which the government cannot potentially infiltrate. This we did with the help of some tech people, and it has a capacity of 10,000 people, but the goal is to make it accessible to activists and organizers only, which have invited to reduce chances of government infiltration. So that was one of the most creative tools or resources that we came up with developing in this current context. The second thing as well, I would say this one goes more in terms of building solidarity. We have come to understand that the government has failed to provide basic social services during the ongoing pandemic, and the citizens managed to organize themselves, especially through the help of activists in Togo and outside of Togo, to run fundraisings and to be able to provide medical health as well as food for people, especially the underprivileged communities, since there are no government social services in place. So these were also some of the strategies that we employed, we deployed, which I believe were pretty successful.
Great, thank you so much. Karen, do you want to speak to these questions?
Sure. I think, like Farida said, obviously COVID is a time of having to find new solutions. For us, one of the things that was really obvious in the beginning of the pandemic was, like I said, in South Hebron, in this area of the West Bank that I didn't mention, but it's the place where there are Israeli settlements and outposts, and that's why it's under full control of the military. Usually Palestinian communities and activists rely on the support of international activists, both sort of more organized, like humanitarian monitoring organizations, and less organized activist groups, to help them do really basic things that of course they should be able to do on their own and are not able to do because of the realities of military occupation. Things like having children arrive to school who need to walk past illegal outpost that's the home to some very violent settlers, and they have previously been escorted by international activists on that walk, as well as by a contingent of soldiers after a long case about it decades ago. Anyway, something, just that small example, when there are no internationals present because of COVID, the Palestinian activists had to find a way to deal with it. And there were two things that happened. One is that a group of Israeli activists actually moved down to a few communities in South Hebron for a period of a few months, which is quite unusual and has proven to be very, very successful. There's many ways in which obviously having Israelis there can be more effective than having internationals there, both in terms of language and in terms of citizenship and the privileges that they have. And at the same time, the groups of Palestinian youth activists have really stepped up as well and taken on roles that previously international activists would have had, for example, accompanying these children. And that's something that I think is really been powerful about what's happening right now is in a way, this conflict and more broadly and specifically the situation of military occupation is very internationalized, and there are a lot of actors. There's a lot of people with stakes in the game, and in some ways the reality of COVID has forced it to be a little bit more local, and asked us to sort of really look around and see what are the things we can do with just the people that are stuck here right now, and in a way that's had a very positive effect, I think, I hope. Certainly it's the beginning of something that we'll see where it goes.
Thank you. Veronica?
Yeah, it's great to know how each one of us and our people are resisting to all these problematics in our countries and also the pandemic. And I can say that creativity has been really important, as it has helped me to reinvent myself many times in order to settle into each situation and to face each challenge. During COVID-19, as Posasuto, which is the organization that I co-founded and that I'm working on, we had to implement strategies to keep doing our work and to reach the people that are our target, which is Black queer people. And I can say that virtuality has been such a challenge, but it has been an important way for us to connect with Black queer people, not only in Colombia, but also in other countries, in order to build a possible safe space for our community to heal, to create, to relieve, to collaborate each other and spread powerful messages through art and complicity. I think that that is the way that creativity has helped us the most during these pandemic times. And also I can say, like, personally, creativity has helped me to discover many skills in myself, to see in my interior, and to see how I can heal myself while I can help others to heal also. So like I said, we had to reinvent ourselves many times in order to survive to everything that is happening, not only the pandemic, but also the strike. And as I said before, the racism, the misogyny, the transphobia, all the social gaps that affect us and that like don't let us to be every day. So I think creativity is being really important in order to especially work on our mental and spiritual health.
Yeah, and that's so important, especially as the challenges increase, to have those opportunities for healing, for reflection, in safe spaces. You know, you all really talked about some of the creative ways that you've been able to build and maintain community and solidarity and continue the work that you're doing throughout COVID and the additional political challenges that you've been facing during these times. Can you speak a little to the lessons that you'll apply, you know, in your work moving forward that you learned during these times? So even when COVID restrictions are lifted, even when there is more ability to kind of work in person rather than just virtually, what lessons or aspects of what you've learned now will you take forward with you? Karen, can you speak to some of that first?
Sure. One thing I didn't mention before that I'll say now is that one of the main things I'm doing is facilitating storytelling classes in English for activists, both Palestinian activists in the West Bank and people with Israeli citizenship, Jews and Palestinians in 48 in Israel. And we're doing that in English for the purpose of getting their stories out to the world. And one of the things that we had to adapt to during COVID was Zoom, obviously. And I think One of the things that the positive things, this is like banal to say because I think the world knows it now, but Zoom does have one advantage, which is connecting people who aren't physically in the same place. And Veronica mentioned this as well in her context. Right now in the group of women that I'm facilitating within Israel, it's people who are coming from all across the country, from many different communities that are fighting different struggles and are all dealing with oppression in some way. And they're not people who would have been able to meet and be in this kind of process together before COVID. I don't think people would have thought to do that on Zoom. And at the same time, I'm part of a cooperative that is a cooperative of teachers and students teaching language in a critical way. And we are teaching and learning Hebrew and Arabic, and that's also something that has moved online during the pandemic. And in both of those contexts, it's something that we've understood we're going to keep because it allows for this connection between people across different communities and even internationally that hadn't previously been, a way we were thinking about holding those educational and organizing spaces. But now I think we're finding that it's very powerful, especially with everything going on here right now, to have those forums where people from different communities interact. And I think the other thing I mentioned before, having the Israeli activists on a more long-term basis in Palestinian communities that are at the front line of settler and military violence is something that I don't know that would have been like even considered if it weren't for COVID, because it's quite complicated politically and practically. And at the same time, I think we understand that it's very powerful, and of course it's not by accident. It builds on long relationships, but it's something that I think will stay even after COVID. Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. Farida, what will you take forward?
Sorry, I'm muted. I believe that for me, the innovation that comes with the difficult times, things that we wouldn't have imagined under regular circumstances, is something that I believe that was positive, that I want us to continue to being one step ahead of the government in terms of them trying to always curtail our rights and our liberties. It made us realize that we live in a world today where we have the ability to develop technology and resources to be able to organize better and resist even better for change and social justice. In addition to that, what I will also take away is the fact that citizens, when times are critical, can totally under these circumstances find solutions to problems that have been existing for decades or even centuries. And that made us realize that a lot of the inequality that we are facing today is man-made and can be fixed if we have the will to do it. And that is my takeaway. And I really hope that this situation will make people realize that we were living in a world that was not sustainable because of the way it was unfair and unequal. And eventually, if we were able to try to make that difference during the COVID-19 pandemic, then we can think together about how to prevent the world from falling back into that inequality afterwards.
Thank you, Farida. Veronica, what will you take forward from this time?
I think that the lesson that I have, not only during the pandemic, but also during this strike, is that people are very powerful, especially Black people, Black, trans, queer, non-binary people, are really powerful, as well as they work together. I think that collectivity is a huge tool that Black people have had historically in order to survive to everything. So I think that collectivity is the most important thing that we should seek. And building and maintaining community during the global pandemic has been a huge challenge due to the lockdown that increased barriers between us, added to the growth of the economic gaps, which have affected mainly to the impoverished communities, which are always Black and Indigenous and trans people, and other marginalized social sectors. So, however, we reaffirmed the importance of collectivity. So we looked for ways to reach Black queer people as Osasuto in order to build community and to share love among us, despite the hostility of a racist, misogynistic, and transphobic society. We have been using art as a powerful platform to relieve, to make visible our realities, and to make our bars, our feelings, our talents, and especially our voices, the protagonists of our activities. I think that self-love, mental and spiritual health, and especially the collectivity, have saved many lives during these situations. And I can say these tools have saved my life. And this must be the goal for Black people, yeah, to work together, to support each other, and always to be in the search of self-love, self-empowerment, and to heal all the violence that we face daily.
Thank you, Veronica. Those are really important lessons to continue to take forward in the work. Before I ask my closing question to the panel, I want to remind everyone who's listening in that you can put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can in the time that we have remaining after our panelists answer the following question. So, you know, as you know, as you all know, and as Veronica, I think you referenced, all the struggles for freedom and rights are related to each other. They're all interconnected, right? Solidarity between people and movements and context is really, really critical. And there's roles that all of us can play in the work that is being done to fight oppression and respect rights, and to increase the possibilities for people living around the world. So I want to ask each of you to say something about what support do you need to continue your struggle? What can people on this event listening in, what can we all be doing to help to support your activism, your movements? Veronica, I will ask you to maybe answer first about this.
Yeah, thank you. I think that in Colombia, we need a lot of international support to make more visible truth. Sorry. To make this more visible the truth about what is happening here. So we need that international make visible what is happening, because there are a lot of confusion and lies that this government is sharing to the world about what is happening. But also we need to receive more support in all ways. Like, of course, we need economic support, yeah, in order to for us to keep doing all of the strategies that we are developing within our communities, to supply, to keep living, you know. But also we need to build networks that can help us in this aspect that I think is the most important, which is the mental health. I think that mental health is an aspect that we don't face in Colombia, and that we need to face, because there are many violence, not only during the national strike, but also the pandemic. And as I said before, due to the social problematics that are structural, and all of those problematics left a lot of like affectations to our mental health. So we need that support. We need that everyone that has the privilege use them in order to help us, in order to help the more marginalized communities, not only in Colombia, but in the world. We need really real structural changes in the world. But by now, I think that it is really important to face the mental health troubles.
Thank you, Veronica. Karen, can you speak to this question? How can people support the work?
Sure, I'll continue from something Veronica said about using your privilege to support marginalized communities that are struggling. I think that's, for anyone who is listening to this call that finds themselves in that position, we all are in different ways in that position, in different aspects of our identities in our lives all the time. But some of us, I think, find ourselves, like me, in a hugely privileged position in the society that we're in. And I think the question in that case is, how can I really use that to stand with people that are fighting for their rights, and push yourself to do things that maybe you find uncomfortable or scary or potentially unfamiliar, and to be willing to put yourself in a situation where you can take the lead from people who have been in this struggle for a long time, whatever struggle it may be, and to show up and to keep showing up. And I think that's something that's relevant all over the world. Practically, like about Israel-Palestine, I know a lot of conversations happening about this in the US right now in different communities. One overarching thing I'll say is that, of course, the US is a huge player in this conflict and in maintaining apartheid and occupation that we find ourselves in. So I know there are some movement in the US Congress right now to push a bill to condition US military aid to Israel. I would encourage you to support that however you can, for the benefit of Palestinians and Israelis and everyone getting out of this cycle of violence that we're in. Definitely more money to buy more US made weapons to fuel also your military industrial complex is not going to help us. So pushing to move away from that, I think, would be a great step that folks in America can take. And at the same time, obviously keeping the focus on some of the things that put this in the global focus right now, to begin with the struggle in Sheikh Jarrah, which is still ongoing, and other neighborhoods in Jerusalem that are also facing expulsions, Silwan. And as I mentioned, the South Hebron Hills, where I'm working, is facing that all the time and has less public attention on it. So to look for those stories and to try to follow activists on the ground, especially Palestinian activists, but also Israeli activists, to hear what's actually happening from the folks that are dealing with it every day.
Thank you, Karen. And Farida, can you tell us what people here can do to help?
Thank you, Ken. A few things in addition to what has already been said, which covers the vast majority. In the case of a country like Togo, the regime really benefits from the anonymity, because very few people know Togo outside of the African region, West African region, because of its small size, its French-speaking, small population. As a result, there isn't a lot of pressure on the military regime in Togo, like it is the case with other authoritarian regimes across the globe. So raising awareness is really important for us in Togo in terms of getting people to know that there is a country in Africa that is ruled by the oldest military regime on the continent, where people have no freedom and liberties, and citizens are literally living in extreme dictatorship. In addition to that, we have tried in the past to push the US government to sanction authoritarian means in Togo and punish the government of Togo for human rights abuses. We have called for the implementation of the Magnitsky Act by the State Department, which clearly states that governments that are abusing human rights can lose certain privileges, such as accessing the United States grants and resources, and also having visas to come to the US. But unfortunately, we have seen countries where the government of Togo is more authoritarian than them, but then those regimes were sanctioned for their human rights atrocities. But unfortunately in Togo, they still get away with it. They continue to benefit from funding from the Department of State, the State Department, the Department of Defense, and many other US funding that they shouldn't be eligible for. So we want to push the US government to sanction them, because continuing to provide financial support and military resources to a regime like that one simply gives the impression that the US is in support of their practices, which clearly violate all the US democratic principles. In addition to that, the Togolese people also need some forms of, especially the activists need some forms of help in terms of building their capacity on an ongoing basis. I will give you one example. When we realized that our government was literally spying on us on our media, social media, and our devices, we had to provide digital security training for a huge number of activists to prepare them to counter the surveillance. But that is something that you have to continue refreshing, because the tools are changing constantly. And to continue doing that, you need resources and you need people. And that's one of the help that will also be in need of in Togo.
Thanks so much. I'm going to hand over to Marie now, who's going to take us through some additional questions that have been submitted by you, the audience. It's still not too late. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box.
And thank you so much. And Veronica and Farida and Karen, thank you so much for all of the wisdom that you just shared with us. And one of the things I hate about webinars, and which I'm just so excited to see, you know, to be back in person with you all at some point in the near future, is that you can't see me just nodding my head so sort of dramatically to so many of the things you said. I mean, Veronica, when you're talking about trauma that lives in the bodies of Black women in particular in Colombia, of Afro-Colombian communities, of people that have been on the receiving end of violence for so many years, I just, you know, there's a sense of shared sort of a power there, and a real reckoning that needs to happen with how we begin to how we work collectively as feminists to transform trauma, to build societies that are more just, more equitable, and in which more people are more free. And you know, Farida and Karen and Veronica, I'm nodding when you're talking about the way that the United States and other sort of world powers, including Israel, have been involved with the oppression that each of you are experiencing in your own lives and families and communities, whether it's through US military aid to both Colombia and to Israel, with, you know, surveillance technology being sold to the Togolese government by Israel and by the United States as its ally, right? These are ways in which my own position sitting here in Denver sees my own sort of interconnectedness to so many of the things you're talking about. And you know, as Karen says, there's a responsibility for all of us in the United States, in the West, wherever we're located, to not turn a blind eye, because we are part of this violence that is affecting so many people's lives all around the globe. And I just want to honor the kind of the work that you're all doing in the context of that violence, in the context of such shared, such overwhelming, I think, state-sanctioned, militarism, patriarchal violence, misogynistic violence, queer-phobic, transphobic violence that you mentioned. I mean, these are very, very difficult contexts in which to be operating, to continue to operate. And I just honor all of you for the work that you're doing. And I look in the audience here, I see some amazing people in the audience here. And I just, I know that a lot of us are feeling the same, that this is not a struggle or issues that are over there. This is something that we all have to engage with wherever we are. So, I see a couple of great questions in the chat. And I wanna actually start with another IGLI alum, Aluel Atem, who's in the chat. Aluel, we're so delighted that you're here. I wish we could see your face. Aluel is from South Sudan. She's a remarkable feminist activist based in Juba. And she says, I'm from South Sudan, where issues and voices of LGBTQIA+ members are extremely discriminated against, even in gender and youth spaces, amongst people who are fighting for freedom and justice for all. She's interested in hearing from Farida in particular on what it's like in Togo, and how do you, Farida, ensure that the voices of sexual and gender minorities are kind of reflected in the advocacy and the feminist work that you do? Thanks, Aluel, so much.
Well, thank you very much for your question, and I'm so glad that you're here, even though it's pretty late in South Sudan. Thank you very much for making the sacrifice. The question you're asking is such an important one, and the answer is such a difficult one. When it comes to the rights of sexual minorities and even gender in the social movement, it's even more difficult for a woman to make the case than it is for a male activist to make that case. Unfortunately, what we tend to notice is that while you may have citizens agreeing across the board on issues of civil rights and liberties, such as freedom of speech and the press and association and electoral processes, when it comes to individual rights in terms of the rights of women and the LGBTQI communities, people start to kind of like disunite. It's literally like if we are allies when we are all demanding democracy, but that democracy does not apply to women or minority groups and sexual minorities. And the moment you start raising those questions, automatically you are castigated and you are attacked and you are abused. In my case particularly, I try as much as possible to raise awareness on these issues when the opportunity comes, such as an ongoing violation against somebody in that community. And doing that always comes with a severe backlash against me, with messages and attacks and threats and insult and slanders, because people may see you as a political figure when you're calling for democracy, but the moment you're calling for LGBTQI rights and gender equality, automatically you are no longer their ally or their friend. But it is a conversation that needs to happen, and which you have been pushing for, especially the issue of sexual violence in a country like Togo under an authoritarian regime. And I'm even currently working on producing a documentary to raise awareness on the ongoing sexual violence against Togolese female activists, movement leaders, and even the female members of the political parties, to show how, while we are fighting for freedom and justice, we still don't even acknowledge the existence of the freedom and the rights of women and the LGBTQI people. So it is a very complex issue, and sometimes you are in a dilemma of whether to choose to keep mute on certain things in order to continue pushing for a messaging. But then at some point I realized that refusing to address both together is only going to make things work in the future, because people will think it is okay to bypass the rights of certain members of the community, put them on the side, and thinking that eventually they will solve themselves in the future.
Thank you so much, Farida. That's so powerful. And I don't know if Veronica or Karen wanted to jump in, but I thought I'd ask another question or two and let you answer also if you'd like to answer anything about that question as you go. Kathy Bell asks a great question. It's a big question, which is, what made you become activists? She asks, what influenced your thinking, and how can young women be encouraged to not only question the current situations, but also feel supported to become actively engaged in solutions? And I'm curious, perhaps Veronica, if you'd be interested in taking that question first, or speaking even to the last one. And actually, you know, before I finish and turn it over to you, let me ask Amelia's. Hi, Amelia. So good to see you on the call. But your great question here about, you know, I think there's a lot of, and I think really what Amelia's question gets at is about performative solidarity, where when we're on Twitter and we're sharing things and we, you know, have hashtag activism, people think that might be enough, reposting links, etc. How do we shift beyond that? How do we really shift towards solidarity that is deep and meaningful and forged in connection and relation, so that we can actually shift power and support the work that each of you are doing? So kind of a set of questions. Feel free to tackle anyone, but perhaps we'll start with Veronica and then turn to Karen and then close it out with Farida.
Okay, thank you. These are really great questions, especially Alwell question. Okay, according to that question, I think that it's really important for us. I'm talking about Black people because it's the people or the community that that I care of, you know, that is the people that I work with. So I think it's really important for us to recognize that we are not the same, that Black people are very diverse, and there are queer people within the Black community. So it's really important to recognize that, and also to recognize that we must not only accept all of those, all of that diversity within us, but also to recognize that we must fight together in order to really like make real changes, you know? We can only fight against racism. Meanwhile, we are being violated by the misogyny and the transphobia and the queerphobia. You know, we must fight integrally about all the problematics that Black people faced, and that's what we are doing in Posasuto, in Colombia, and this is a need that we have not only in Colombia but also in Togo, in Sudan, a need of recognizing our diversity and also recognizing our privilege and intersectionalities. And according to the other question about what made me to be an activist, I think that maybe anger. I think anger is like my first motivation to be an activist. The anger of seeing and realizing all the social inequalities, all the social gaps that always affect most to Black people. You know, we are always in the worst places in the society. And that makes me feel really anger and motivates me to fight against that, because I think that only us can really work to transform that, because we are the ones who live it, you know. Maybe other social sectors don't understand what we face daily because they don't live it. So I think it's really important that each community fights in order to transform the realities, because white supremacy isn't going to fight for us, because they have the privilege and the power and they want to maintain it. So only us can do it.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Karen, we have about 3 minutes left, so maybe just about 1.5 minutes each, if you can.
Okay, I'll be quick, and I'll say what keeps me an activist, which is important, is community and is deep relationships with people. I think, and that's maybe connected to the question of what to do beyond sharing things on social media. I think to really sustain this kind of work, you need community and relationships of trust. And I think I just want to reiterate the point for anyone that finds themselves in North America. I mean, you need to figure out the way to do it, but there are huge struggles happening of Indigenous people all over, and of Black people, and I'm sure many other things. But you know, showing up and sticking with it, especially if you're not coming to the place of being active because you're personally the one suffering. That's my advice.
Thanks, Karen. Farida, any final thoughts?
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, since we are out of time, I think I'll touch base quickly on Amelia's question about what to do beyond reposting on social media. I believe that the most effective ways to show solidarity with movement from a distance beyond social media is to create networks of activists, of community members and activists, where you can exchange ideas on how to take action quickly to support an ongoing struggle, from contacting representatives to raising funds to providing supplies, or even respite and rescue for activists at risk. Creating network is the most effective and efficient way to go forward with that. And responding to Kadi's question, what made me an activist, I'll say that activism runs in my family, from my grandfather, who was jailed many times under the colonial rule during the French colonization, to my father, who also spent almost half of his life in prison under the Nyasimbe regime in Togo. It's been a family struggle of people fighting to end oppression in Togo, and that's what got me into it. I wouldn't say I was inspired by that story, or rather say I was triggered by the level of abuse and brutality, and unfortunately continues today. And I really hope that our children wouldn't have to live through the same level of dictatorship that we endured in Togo. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Gosh, I feel like I could spend a lot longer with all of you in this space, but I want to thank all of the donors and the supporters who made this program possible. What Farida just talked about in terms of building connections, and what Karen talked about in terms of building deep relationships. This is exactly what the Inclusive Global Leadership Initiative at the Korbel School is all about. I can't thank Hen, my friend, enough for stepping up this year and for really carrying our programming through. We have a lot coming. We have a wonderful workshop on creativity in movements with artists, academics, and activists coming in December. We'll return to some sort of semblance of hopefully our traditional IGLI Summer Institute next summer when the pandemic and travel restrictions abate. And we'll have a series of programs next year, events, hopefully in person as well as online. And we'll have additional practitioners in residence teaching courses for graduate students at the Korbel School, which has just been a remarkable opportunity for students this year. And I want to thank Farida for teaching such an incredible class for our students. So Karen, Farida, Veronica, and Hen, thank you so much for being here. And to all of you in the audience, I'm so grateful for your being in this space with us today and for joining us. Take good care and be well.
Thank you.
Thank